2019 was quite an eventful year in Hollywood, with plenty of releases, including major hits and also a number of flops. However, one studio stood supreme and towered over all the others as it showed off its many properties and the nostalgia audiences have for them. I'm of course talking about Disney, which became the first studio to make over $10 billion in ticket sales in a single year. The mouse arranged all the chess pieces together to create a dynamite year, with $1 billion success after another. Of course, the biggest one was Marvel's Avengers Endgame, which brought so many superheroes together to create the ultimate crowd-pleasing culmination. And, unless you adjust for inflation, it became the highest-grossing film of all time, which is no easy feat. Disney did not just rely on Iron Man and Captain America, though. Captain Marvel launched a franchise of her own to the tune of over $1 billion. The Lion King and Aladdin show the remake train is not slowing down anytime soon with their billion-dollar tallies. Frozen 2 and Toy Story 4 prove Disney's ability at producing animated franchises that appeal to all ages. And yes, those also made $1 billion. And as I'm recording this, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker is also on its way to crossing $1 billion. I'm saying billion a lot in this video, but that was the magic number at Disney in 2019. And since I don't think they'll secure as many movies with that gross in 2020, they should celebrate that accomplishment. Meanwhile, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil may have seen somewhat of a decrease from its predecessor, but it still made close to $500 million. Disney is probably less pleased with Dumbo, which cost a little too much and likely lost money. And I have a feeling Penguins will be the final Disney nature documentary to open in theaters. But hey, at least there's now Disney+. Warner Brothers had an interesting year. They're second in market share, but that's mostly because of a pair of clowns. Joker became a legitimate phenomenon and made history as the first R-rated movie to gross over $1 billion. People really wanted to see Joaquin Phoenix dance down some stairs. It Chapter 2 may not have made as much as the first one, but it's still one of the highest grossing horror films of all time. So either way, Pennywise is smiling from whatever sewer he's sitting in right now. Speaking of horror, Annabelle Comes Home and The Curse of La Llorona continue to show the drawing abilities of the Conjuring series. Shazam did quite nicely for a superhero comedy, helped by a reasonable $100 million budget. Detective Pikachu had a solid return for a potential franchise starter, even becoming one of the most successful video game adaptations. More concerning were the numbers for Godzilla King of the Monsters, which only puts more pressure on Godzilla vs. Kong to wow audiences with its kaiju action. Despite being number 2 for the year, WB had a lot of notable flops. There's the Lego Movie 2, which sadly put an end to Warner's Lego franchise, to the point the bricks have now jumped ship to Universal. Dr. Sleep, meanwhile, could not entice enough people back to the Overlook Hotel. Neither Isn't It Romantic and Shaft found much of an audience in North America, but I'm sure they made something back from selling the foreign rights to Netflix. The studio also invested a lot in mid-budget dramas, which were pretty much ignored. I guess The Good Liar was cheap enough to get by, but the rest of them, not so lucky. Tell me how many of these you saw in theaters. They released the teen romance The Sun Is Also a Star, the Sundance acquisition Blind by the Light, Edward Norton's detective story Motherless Brooklyn, the gangster picture The Kitchen, Clint Eastwood's latest biographical drama Richard Jewell, and the adaptation of the best-selling novel The Goldfinch. They actually co-financed that last one with Amazon to lessen the risk, and they still lost a lot of money on it. Warner Brothers in 2019 is an example of how you can release a few highly profitable blockbusters and still lose a considerable amount of money in other projects. I was actually more impressed by Sony and Universal's box office performances, and both ended up being neck and neck in market share, with Sony just squeaking by at the tail end of December. Sony's biggest hit, unsurprisingly, was Spider-Man Far From Home, which became the web crawler's first movie to cross over $1 billion. Jumanji: The Next Level continued the impressive run of this series, which seems destined to become a new Christmas family staple. The new Quentin Tarantino film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, also found a sizable audience over the summer, becoming the director's latest hit. A casually paced, almost 3-hour ode to 1960s Tinseltown that's somewhat related to the Manson murders, not exactly the easiest sell, which makes its success even more astounding. Sony capitalized on the recent trend of escape rooms of a horror movie based on the concept, which proved highly successful, and there's already a sequel set for later this year. Greta Gerwig's adaptation of Little Women played very well over the Christmas and New Year's period, and will probably keep chugging along through award season. They released a few low-budget films that provided a nice bit of change too, like the canine family movie A Dog's Way Home, the religious film Overcomer, and the horror films Brightburn and The Intruder. Zombieland Double Tap managed to make a little more than the first film, which is pretty impressive for a sequel arriving 10 years later. In contrast, Men in Black International and the Angry Birds Movie 2 saw a fairly sizable drop, but Sony was smart enough not to splurge on the budgets, so they were not hurt too badly. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood has not been quite the breakout the studio might have hoped for, even with Tom Hanks playing such a beloved icon, but I have a feeling Mr. Rogers would have been proud anyway. In the flop category, there was the cop movie Black and Blue, and the drug cartel thriller Miss Bala, neither of which lasted long in theaters. As for Charlie's Angels, let's just say it'll probably be a while before we see this property on the big screen, or even the small screen for that matter. Like Sony, Universal also did very well with major tentpoles and low-budget projects. Fast and Furious is one of the studio's biggest series, and the success of its first spin-off, Hobbs and Shaw, shows yet again why they keep making these loud, silly, fast car movies. How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World ended the fan-favorite DreamWorks trilogy on a strong note, and Us confirmed Jordan Peele has become a major force in horror. Considering this is only his second directorial effort, it's doubly remarkable how quickly he's become a trusted filmmaker. The Secret Life of Pets 2 saw a shocking drop-off from the blockbuster first movie, but Illumination's smart budgeting meant it still made a sizable profit for Universal. Glass continued the Shyamalan comeback train and solidified his current relationship with Universal and Blumhouse. Even though Disney got the international grosses, the Globe still came out nicely in the end. The Beatles fantasy Yesterday, the raunchy comedy Good Boys, the holiday charmer Last Christmas, and the teen horror Ma were all low-budget films that proved to be solid worldwide earners. The sequels, Happy Death Day to You and A Dog's Journey, saw their grosses slashed almost in half from the first movies, but they were made for modest enough sums. There was also DreamWorks Animation's Abominable, which was one of the studio's lowest earners, but they were at least reasonable with the budget. Black Christmas, Queen and Slim, and Little did not set the studio back too much, but any returns they do get will be meager. Universal really only had one misfire in 2019, but it was kind of a big one. While Cats certainly became instant meme fodder, audiences have otherwise stayed away from those jellicle felines. So I would not expect the film adaptation of Starlight Express anytime soon. The good news for Paramount is they did not have the lowest market share among major studios like in the past few years. The bad news is they still have not pulled themselves out of their current situation. Their biggest success story came with the Elton John musical biopic Rocket Man. It was a nice bit of counter-programming over the summer and proved the enduring popularity of songs like Tiny Dancer and Crocodile Rock. Paramount also did well with the low-budget horror titles Crawl and Pet Sematary. What Men Want and Dora and the Lost City of Gold also did okay business by putting different spins on Viacom-owned properties. Playing with Fire has proven unremarkable, and even though it has a few European and Asian countries left open in, I don't know how much those will help. Unfortunately for Paramount, their biggest disappointments this year were also by far the most expensive. The box office performance of Terminator Dark Fate may have finally been the sign to give the franchise a rest, while Gemini Man is an example of how you sometimes need more than just a big star and state-of-the-art special effects to excite audiences. And Wonder Park was an animated miss, although Nickelodeon will try again with a television series. When is that show supposed to air anyway? I have not heard any updates in a while. Finally, 20th Century Fox had a bit of an unusual and admittedly saddening year, as they found themselves officially becoming a part of the Walt Disney Company, and their entire marketing and distribution teams replaced overnight. In Disney's defense, Fox did not exactly leave them with the strongest slate to work with. Alita Battle Angel is an interesting case, as it did find a sizable audience and certainly did far better than previous Hollywood attempts to adapt Japanese manga. It was a very expensive movie though, but the ball's in Disney's court on whether to move forward with a sequel. Fox hosted it alright with the religious film Breakthrough. Ford vs. Ferrari has pulled in solid numbers for an adult drama, but it was fairly pricey and thus will take a little while to hit profitability. But maybe potential Oscar nominations could help. I think it's too early to call the fate of Spies in Disguise, as it's still going through its international rollout and has a mostly competition-free January to play in. So ask me again in February. The rest of the 20th Century Fox releases last year, not great. The pairing of Kumail Nanjiani and Dave Bautista in Stuber did not draw the crowds, and The Art of Racing in the Rain may have been one Dog's Inner Thoughts movie too many. Despite the presence of Brad Pitt, audiences were largely left cold by the science fiction movie Ad Astra. The Kid Who Would Be King was a family film that came and left in January without any fanfare, even if it did get solid reviews. And Dark Phoenix ended the long-running X-Men movie series with a thud, an embarrassing way to finish its run after the first film arguably kicked off the current millennium of superhero hits. Hopefully 2020 ends up being a much better year for both 20th Century Fox under Disney and Paramount under a recombined Viacom-CBS. Now, usually with these videos, I just focus on the major studios. But this year is kind of different due to the mini-majors finding a few notable hits of their own. Lionsgate actually finished 5th place in market share, largely thanks to John Wick Chapter 3, Knives Out, A Medea Family Funeral, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, Angel Has Fallen, and 5 Feet Apart. It's always nice to see the other studios do well, so I'm happy for Lionsgate. STX Entertainment had an underwhelming 2019, but they did have 2 hits that deserve a shout-out. First, there was the dramedy The Upside, which was a sleeper hit in January as helped by the presence of Kevin Hart. Then there was Hustlers, which rode Oscar buzz for Jennifer Lopez and an intriguing rip-from-the-headlines premise to box office success. Both of these movies bucked conventional wisdom that audiences won't go and see mid-budget, adult-targeted films in theaters, and it was refreshing to see them perform so well. And now we enter a new decade, and it'll be exciting seeing the changes that hit studios and exhibitors as franchises continue to grow and streaming services become more popular. As always, I'll be rooting for all the studios to have an extraordinary 2020, and I'll see you next time.